6 hours into a British Airways flight, Meghan Markle was handed a card that should have been simple. Sweet, polite, forgettable. Instead, it became the kind of detail people stare at twice. The card was signed by crew members. A bottle of champagne sat beside it. The message sounded warm, personal, and carefully done. But one line changed the whole mood of the story. It was addressed to "Dearest Harry and Meghan." And that is where everything began to feel strange. Because on May 18, 2026, the public record painted a very different picture. British Airways flight BA269 had left Heathrow for Los Angeles. Meghan's name was on the journey. Harry's was not. Reports around the trip described her as traveling alone after an event in Geneva. Coverage the next day spoke about her return, her flight, her reaction. Not theirs. So why was a card on a solo flight written as if a husband and wife were sitting side by side? That is not a tiny detail. That is the whole mystery. By the following morning, the card appeared on Meghan's Instagram. By that same afternoon, the story was already moving through People magazine, then Hello, then GB News, then everywhere else people talk about the Sussexes. It was presented as a touching moment. A crew had helped mark an anniversary in the air. A few kind words. Some champagne. A little humanity in the middle of a long journey. On the surface, it sounded lovely. But once people stopped looking at the romance of it, and started looking at the wording, the timing, and the way the story was pushed out, the mood shifted fast. Because this was not just about a card. It was about how the moment appeared to arrive already polished, already framed, already ready for the public. And when that happens, people start asking different questions. Not, "Wasn't that nice?" But, "Who knew what and when?" The image itself was almost too neat. The kind of neat that makes critics lean in. The handwriting in the main body looked careful, rounded, and deliberate. Then there was a separate line in a different hand, reportedly from the captain, Ed French. That made the card feel even more official, even more special, and at the same time, even more difficult to explain away as some quick spur-of-the-moment gesture thrown together in a galley. Because if the captain was writing his own note, then the captain knew what the occasion was. If the crew addressed it to Harry and Meghan, then someone had given them both names. If the card was prepared with a bottle of champagne and later appeared online with a full emotional framing, then the whole thing was no longer just a private kindness on a flight. It had become content. And once it became content, people began pulling at every thread. The first thread was the journey itself. The public timeline showed Meghan in Geneva the day before, speaking at a World Health Organization event connected to children and social media. Then came the route back, Switzerland to Heathrow, Heathrow to Los Angeles, then home. The long-haul leg was BA269. Reports said it left late and landed in Los Angeles in the evening. Nothing in the visible coverage placed Harry on that aircraft. Nothing in the early write-ups suggested the couple had flown together. The coverage read like a solo return. That matters because the card did not say, "Happy anniversary, Meghan." It did not say, "Wishing you a wonderful anniversary." It did not even say, "To Meghan. With love from the crew." It said both names. It wrote the moment as a couple's scene, even though the public version of events showed only one person in the cabin. And suddenly the whole thing felt less like a surprise and more like a set piece with one prop slightly out of place. That is usually how these stories crack open. Not with some huge confession. Not with one dramatic scream. With one tiny thing that doesn't fit. Then another. Then another. The second thing people noticed was the speed of the rollout. Between the plane touching down in Los Angeles and the story landing in magazines, there was very little time. Yet in that short window, the moment had already become more than a private memory. It was now shaped into a public anecdote, complete with quotes from a source close to Meghan, emotional framing, and a ready-made angle about kindness from a British Airways crew. That kind of turnaround does not automatically prove planning. But it does raise eyebrows. Because ordinary travel moments do not usually move that quickly unless somebody decides they should. And that is where the atmosphere around the card changed from warm to watchful. Commentators began asking whether the crew had really just guessed the anniversary. Others asked how they would know to include Harry by name if Harry was not even there. Some pointed to the difference between a sweet on-board gesture and a polished media beat. Others said the story fit too neatly into a wider pattern people had already started noticing around Meghan and Harry, personal moments appearing in public almost immediately, not by accident, but in a form that felt curated. That word kept floating around the whole story. Curated. Not fake. Not fully proven. But arranged. Managed. Guided. Like somebody had made sure the light hit the scene just right before the rest of the world saw it. And the more people looked, the stranger it felt that such a tiny card could carry so much weight. Because if it really was spontaneous, then the wording was oddly precise. If it was not spontaneous, then somebody had helped build the illusion that it was. That is why the card mattered. It was not just paper. It was a test of the official version. And once people realized that, they stopped reading it like a sweet anniversary note. They started reading it like evidence. Not of a crime, but of a method, a style, a way of turning private life into public theater without ever admitting that was the plan. By then, one thing was already clear. This was no longer a travel story. It was a story about Meghan, Harry, British Airways, and a card that seemed to know too much. And the deeper people dug, the less accidental it all looked. To understand why the BA269 moment blew up, you have to look at the days around it. Not just the flight. The rhythm of the week. The mood. The message. And the way Meghan's public life has often worked when emotion, image, and timing all meet in the same place. Just before the flight, Meghan had been in Geneva. She appeared at an event linked to the World Health Organization, speaking about social media and its effect on children. On paper, it was serious, modern, worthy. It placed her in a space of concern, advocacy, and public purpose. But critics were quick to point out the tension around it, because around the same time, she had posted personal images that drew her own family life back into public view. That contrast mattered. It gave the week a strange double image. One side, concern about the online world and how it shapes children. The other side, carefully chosen glimpses from private life, posted into that same online world. People notice contradictions faster than speeches. And once they notice them, they rarely let go. So when Meghan left Geneva and made her way back through Heathrow for the Los Angeles flight, the atmosphere around her was already loaded. This was not just a woman taking a flight home. This was Meghan Markle, one half of the Sussex brand, moving through a media space where even a hand gesture can become a headline. Every post, every image, every leaked anecdote sits inside a much larger machine. That is what many outside the royal orbit miss. These stories are never just about the event itself. They are about placement. What comes first? What comes next? What lands where? And who benefits? By the time Meghan boarded BA269, a larger question was already hanging in the air. What was this week trying to say about her? About Harry? About the marriage? About the brand they have spent years trying to shape outside palace walls? Critics of the Sussexes often say the answer is always the same: closeness, warmth, meaning, emotional depth, and just enough intimacy to keep people talking without ever giving the full picture. Supporters see it differently. They see a couple fighting for control of their own story after years of hostile coverage. That divide matters because the BA269 card fell right into the middle of it. To one side, it looked charming. To the other, it looked staged. And the reason it landed so hard is because it did not feel like an isolated moment. It felt like another example in a long-running pattern people believed they had seen before. Moments around Meghan and Harry often arrive with a strange mix of softness and strategy. The emotional angle comes first. The wider machinery becomes visible only later. A private image appears. A magazine gets an exclusive. An unnamed source offers a warm explanation. Aggregators repeat it. Social media does the rest. By then, the frame is already set. That is why the People magazine angle mattered so much. The story did not drift into public on its own. It landed through a familiar channel, one that many critics believe has repeatedly been used to present Sussex moments in the best possible light. That does not prove wrongdoing. But it does deepen suspicion. Especially when the detail at the center of the story already feels off. When a private moment appears in public almost fully packaged, people stop asking whether it happened and start asking who prepared the version they were meant to see. That is exactly what happened here. Then there is Harry. His absence, or at least the strong public impression of his absence, hangs over the whole story like a shadow. Harry has spoken many times about his difficult relationship with the United Kingdom and his security fears around returning. Publicly, he was not tied to that trip through Heathrow. He was not photographed there. Coverage did not place him on the plane. Yet there he was, named right at the top of the card. It made the note feel less like something created in front of Meghan and more like something drafted with a broader story in mind. That is what made people uneasy. Because a crew member writing, "Happy anniversary, Meghan," would feel natural. A crew writing, "Dearest Harry and Meghan," on a flight where only Meghan appeared to be present felt like someone was writing for the audience, not just the passenger. And if they were writing for the audience, then who exactly was the audience supposed to believe this moment belonged to? A wife on a flight? Or a marriage on display? That question pulled in a lot of older criticism about the Sussex image. Over the years, Meghan and Harry have been accused by critics of mixing sincerity with presentation so tightly that the line between real and managed becomes hard to see. Again, supporters would say that is simply modern public life. Famous people tell their own stories now. They do not wait for newspapers to do it for them. Fair enough. But the BA269 moment was awkward in a way that made both sides pause. Because even if you believe every celebrity manages their image, there is still a difference between a well-timed release and a visible slip in the staging. This felt like a visible slip. And the more commentators went back through the wording, the clearer the problem became. The card did not just celebrate a date. It assumed a shared presence. It assumed a couple scene. It assumed Harry belonged inside a moment the public record did not place him in. That is why what happened next felt inevitable. People started looking for a mechanism. Not gossip. Not vibes. A mechanism. How would an airline know? How would a crew know? How would a captain know? How would the anniversary make its way from private life into an onboard gesture complete with names, signatures, and champagne? Once people moved from emotion to process, the whole story took a harder turn. Because if there was a system behind it, then the card was not really magic at all. It was procedure. Or prompting. Or both. And that possibility changed everything. The real shift came when people stopped staring at the card as one message and started breaking it into pieces. That is when the mystery got sharper. There was the main body of the note. There were the signatures. Then there was a separate line in a different hand said to be from the captain, Ed French. That line mattered more than almost anything else. Because once a captain adds a personal anniversary note, this is no longer just a few crew members being sweet in the cabin. Now the command side of the aircraft appears aware of a private milestone. And that means somebody, somewhere, passed the information along. A captain does not usually guess the wedding anniversary of a passenger at random. That sounds obvious. But in this story, obvious things did most of the work. The note from Ed French reportedly congratulated Meghan on the anniversary and welcomed her on board. Simple words. Nothing explosive. Yet those simple words carried a huge implication. The occasion was known in advance. Not suspected. Not half-heard. Known enough to be written down in a clean, confident sentence. And once that was obvious, the next question landed hard. Who told them? There were only a few real possibilities. Either Meghan's team had informed the airline, or British Airways had access to customer information that flagged a personal milestone, or the anniversary was mentioned directly during the trip in a way that led the crew to build the moment around it. Each of those possibilities is very different in tone. One suggests outside planning. One suggests internal airline systems. One suggests a more casual on-board setup. But none of them feel the same as the innocent fairy tale version of events, where a crew somehow just sensed romance in the air and decided to honor it. That is the version critics rejected first. Then came the timing. The flight landed in Los Angeles. Soon after, the card was online. Soon after that, People magazine had an exclusive describing how touched Meghan was by the kindness of the crew, how they helped mark the anniversary, and how the gesture included treats not only for Meghan and Harry as a couple but even for the children. That detail made the whole thing feel even more complete. Too complete, some thought. Because now the story was not just about a woman handed a note on a plane. It was about a whole family moment. Harry was in it. The children were in it. The emotional setting had widened. The card on the tray table was no longer just a card. It had become proof of tenderness, proof of memory, proof of being cherished. There is nothing wrong with wanting that. But critics said the packaging was too perfect. And perfection is dangerous when even one detail is off. What many people found especially strange was the speed of the magazine framing. In a short span of time, the event had gone from flight moment to online content to media narrative. That kind of movement suggests that someone wanted the moment preserved quickly before it could fade into just another celebrity travel anecdote. It also created a new question. If Meghan was truly surprised, why did the public thank you and media shaping happen so fast? That does not mean the answer must be manipulation. But it does mean the moment was not simply left to exist on its own. It was turned outward. That is why the story became less about the flight and more about exposure. Who benefited from this version? Who wanted this image of Meghan and Harry's marriage in circulation right then? Why during that week? Why with that language? Why through those outlets? And why, when the questions grew louder, did British Airways not step in and clear up the confusion? That silence did a lot of damage. Because when a major airline gets positive celebrity attention, the normal instinct would be simple. Confirm the sweet story. Thank the passenger. Celebrate the crew. Let the good press roll. But that did not happen. No big cheerful clarification. No public statement saying, yes, this was a spontaneous gesture from our wonderful staff. And no sharp denial either. Just silence. That silence left the card alone in the spotlight, and the card did not explain itself very well. The absence of a clean airline answer gave critics room to build their case. They argued that if British Airways openly confirmed it had been a planned on-board anniversary arrangement, then the spontaneous crew kindness angle would collapse. If they denied it, the story could turn ugly in another direction. So silence became the safest path. Whether that is true or not, silence always changes the mood of a story. It leaves the public with the object itself. In this case, that object was a handwritten card with the wrong emotional geometry. A couple's note on a solo journey. Around that same time, commentators also tied the card into a larger stream of Sussex publicity from that week. There were already discussions about personal images, family-centered content, and efforts to keep attention focused on Meghan's brand, her marriage, and her household. Seen inside that wider flow, the BA269 card did not look isolated. It looked like one more polished tile in a much bigger mosaic. That is when the story stopped being merely suspicious and started feeling symbolic. The card came to represent a larger fear people have about celebrity life now, that even the moments meant to feel soft, random, and human may be guided into place long before the audience sees them. Not all of them. Not always. But enough that people have learned to watch the seams. And this one had seams all over it. The names. The captain's note. The The timing. The media rollout. The silence. Each detail on its own could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern that was much harder to ignore. Still, the deepest turn in the whole story had not arrived yet. Because the most important detail was not written on the card at all. It was written somewhere else. In the airline's own information. And once people found that, the mystery moved from suspicion to structure. The most damaging part of the BA269 story was never the handwriting. It was the possibility that British Airways already had a built-in way for this kind of moment to happen. That changed everything. Because once people found references to how the airline handles passenger data, loyalty profiles, and personalized onboard touches, the "how could they possibly know?" question stopped being impossible. Now there was a practical route. If personal milestones can be visible through customer systems, and if crews are sometimes equipped to acknowledge them, then the anniversary did not need to come from nowhere. It could have come from the system, or from a prompt to the system, or from a message attached to the booking. And just like that, the mystery became much more grounded. Not solved, but grounded. Some commentary around the story also pointed to airline guidance suggesting that anniversary celebrations can indeed be recognized on board, sometimes with champagne or a signed card. Often at crew discretion. If that is true, then one piece of the puzzle is no puzzle at all. These gestures happen. Airlines know people love them. Staff can mark special occasions. But here is the problem. The existence of a process does not prove the BA269 moment was spontaneous. In some ways, it makes a arranged version even easier to imagine. That is the twist. The airline policy did not erase suspicion. It sharpened it. Because if British Airways has a known path for anniversary acknowledgements, then the card no longer looks like a miracle. It looks like something that could be set in motion with the right nudge. And if somebody nudged it, then the sweet public version becomes less a surprise and more a production. Again, not necessarily sinister. Just managed. That is the word that hangs over everything. Managed. And when people went back over the full picture, the card started to feel like the cleanest little symbol of a much messier issue. Not whether Meghan should enjoy kind treatment. Not whether Harry should be named by people who know who she is. Not whether celebrities get special handling. Of course they do. The issue was whether the public was being sold one version of the moment, while the facts pointed toward another. That is why the reaction got so strong. For critics, the card became proof that Meghan and Harry still live inside a cycle of emotional image building that they know exactly how to feed. The anniversary note was not seen as touching. It was seen as tactical. Another soft focus scene placed carefully into the public stream. Another reminder that private life can be used as material the second it becomes useful. For supporters, the backlash looked unfair and mean. They would argue that even if the airline knew the date, even if the staff had some prompting, the gesture was still kind. Meghan still received it. She still appreciated it. The online rage, from that point of view, said more about the obsession around her than about the card itself. There is truth in that too. But what made this case different was how visible the crack was. Usually, polished celebrity moments work because every detail lines up. Here, one detail did not. Harry's name sat there like a loose thread begging to be pulled. Once pulled, it brought the rest with it. Then there was Ed French. His name gave the story a face beyond Meghan and Harry. It made the whole thing more concrete. Not just faceless crew. Not just vague kindness. A named captain. A specific hand. A real person attached to a line that deepened the mystery instead of softening it. That matters in stories like this. Specific names make atmospheres feel factual. And yet, oddly, they can also make the uncertainty worse. Because the public can now picture the scene too clearly. The cabin, the card, the captain's note, the signatures, the champagne, the image later posted online. The scene becomes almost cinematic. And once something turns cinematic, people begin to suspect direction. That is why the aftermath lingered. The cards stayed online. The article stayed up. The questions stayed alive. And British Airways stayed quiet. That silence, more than anything, left space for the harshest interpretation to grow. If the airline had simply said, "Yes, our crew sometimes marks special occasions when aware of them," the mystery might have cooled. If they had said, "No, no one briefed us from outside," some of the speculation might have narrowed. But with no clean answer, the public filled in the gaps the way it always does. With belief. With distrust. With whatever version best fits what they already think about Meghan and Harry. That is why the BA269 story became bigger than a card. It turned into a miniature argument about fame itself. About whether intimacy is still real once it enters the media cycle. About whether celebrity kindness can ever just be kindness when it is photographed, posted, sourced, and amplified within hours. About whether the modern royal-adjacent world is built on feeling first and explanation later. And maybe that is the real reason this story stuck. Not because a card is earth-shattering, but because it felt familiar. Too familiar. A small, emotional object placed in front of the public with just enough sweetness to lower its guard, and just enough inconsistency to wake its suspicion. In the end, the card did not prove everything critics wanted it to prove. But it also did not support the innocent version cleanly enough to quiet the room. That is the uncomfortable middle this story lives in. Not total certainty. Not total innocence. Just a polished moment with fingerprints all over it. And perhaps that is the truth people found hardest to ignore. Because if one anniversary card can carry this many questions, what does that say about all the other moments people scroll past without stopping? The smiling photo. The grateful quote. The carefully timed glimpse into a life the public is invited to feel close to, but never close enough to check. The BA269 card offered one of those rare accidents in modern image making. The illusion held. Then one line gave way. "Dearest Harry and Meghan." That was all. Just a few words. But they changed the scene from charming to suspicious, from personal to public, from soft to strategic. And once that happened, the card was never really a card again. It became a window. Into Meghan and Harry. Into British Airways. Into how stories are built now. Into how romance, fame, access, and media all blur together until nobody can fully tell where the real moment ends and the polished version begins. These stories tell us something uncomfortable about power. Not the loud kind. The soft kind. The kind that arrives with a smile, a signature, a glass of champagne, and a message that looks sweet until you read it twice.